Here's why gas is so expensive right now. So it's 2022, gas is extremely expensive. In fact, it's at all-time highs, which means that gas has never been more expensive in the entire history of the planet than it is today. This is caused by a few different things. So I just want to talk about why gas is so expensive and what could possibly be driving price up so aggressively. So if you think back to 2020, you'll remember that we had a pandemic. And so pandemic started in 2020 and it continued through today. We're still seeing some of the effects of that. But in 2020, we had something very, very interesting happen. And this is something that really affected the demand for crude oil. Everybody was on lockdown, which means that for the most part, nobody was leaving their house, which means they weren't traveling, number one. Number two, they were not commuting to work, which is a huge demand generator for gas, crude oil, all those things, right? So if people are staying at home, they're not traveling anywhere, they're not even commuting to work, what do you think happens to gas prices? We saw something so interesting happen where crude oil demand literally dropped so low that it went negative. And this was something that was thought by many to be impossible. And so if we get into the minds of these oil producers, right? They're producing all this oil, they're having to pay people to take it off their hands because it's negative prices. What do you think is going through their mind? Well, why the heck should we produce so much oil? If we can't even sell this oil, if we have to pay people to take it, maybe we shouldn't produce so much oil. And that's exactly what they did. They cut production. And cutting production is very, very fast. Let's also think about logistically, how fast is it to cut production? Well, really, you just shut off your well. So now production is like cut in half, let's say, or cut down to maybe 20%. With cutting down their production, they began to drive the price of oil back up. Crude oil began to stabilize. We began to see it continue slowly back up. And then as people began to come out of lockdown, they're like, hey, I just missed out on 2 years of traveling, 2 years of my life that I could have been traveling, could have been going on vacations, could have been doing this, could have been doing that. Now travel has come back very, very aggressively, and people are wanting to make up for that time that they lost during the pandemic. And so now people are traveling more than they normally would. And so guess what that now does to the demand of oil? We just cut down our production way, way, way down to meet demand, which was down here, and then we just exploded demand. So now demand is way up here, but production is down here. And to scale production back up, that's not an instant thing. It's not a matter of just shutting down a well. Drilling oil wells takes time. And so you can't just do that suddenly. You can't just boost production immediately. So that's a process that has to happen. This is exactly what's going on right now. And this is what's causing these high prices because oil production is still way down. They're not able to keep up with demand. Supply is super low. Demand is extremely high in comparison to supply. That's creating a huge imbalance. Crude oil is also being affected by the situation going on between Russia and Ukraine. I'm not going to go into the details, but basically Russia is a pretty big producer of crude oil. So they supply about 10% of the world's supply of crude oil. By an uncertainty around them and their production, going on, that's also potentially threatening the supply of oil, which is also driving prices up. So keeping them up there, right? Okay, so now as investors, what can we do with this information? Supply is still down here. Demand is way up here, but guess what? Supply is trying to catch up. The oil companies, they're trying to increase production. They're trying to increase all those things to make us meet our demand up here, right? They're trying to crank up the supply of crude oil. So as an investor, I looked at this a while back and I'm like, hey, that's an industry that I want to be a part of. This is something that I could see. I'm like, hey, we cut down our supply because demand is low. But guess what? Supply is going to return. Eventually, the pandemic is going to end. And eventually, we're going to return to our regular traveling habits. We're going to continue coming back to work. As an investor, I want to position myself in the most profitable position where if I invest into an oil well, or something in that field, if I have equity in that field, as that field continues to provide value, right? We're providing crude oil, we're providing value, gas prices are going up, we're making money off of that. So as investors, we've positioned ourselves fundamentally in such a way that allows us to take advantage of this huge swing that's happening in crude oil. The other thing to note here is there's a fundamental way to approach it, right? We understand the economic side of it. We're like, okay, fundamentals look great. We're bullish on oil. I remain bullish on oil even to this day. I believe that it's still going to continue going up just because of some things that I see going on in the world. We also have a technical approach to it, right? So fundamentally, I'm positioned good. I'm positioned in such a way that I'm going to make money. Technically speaking, I have to make sure that, hey, I'm not just investing into any oil well. I'm strategically choosing which oil wells I want to invest in based on what I see going on in that area and based on how I see this oil well playing out over the next 5, 10, 15 years maybe. If I want this oil well to pay me for the next 10 years, I better be strategic about it, because when I invest into that oil well, I'm tying up my hard-earned capital into this investment, and this investment is now producing some sort of return for me. So I want to position myself in the best way possible. And for me, the easiest way to do that is to work with people who are experts at that. I have no idea how to drill an oil well. I have no idea how to extract oil. I don't know how to frack. So maybe I should find somebody that I can partner with in that field. And that was exactly my train of thought. And I found somebody that I trust, somebody that's running my oil portfolio. They're basically using my money to invest into these oil wells, to drill new wells, and I'm getting a cut of all of the production that's happening there. I literally have not touched a drop of oil throughout this whole investment, yet I'm still getting paid every single month. So I'm getting paid based off of my equity ownership of these oil wells. Of course, they're gonna get part of the profits. There's a profit split involved. So for them operating this whole investment for me, it's worthwhile because I get to spend my time doing whatever I want. I have the time freedom associated with it. I have the passive income associated with it. However, by building this network of people that could run my oil investments for me, not only do they run my investments, but everybody that's in my community, the people that are in my mentorship program, are also benefiting from this Rolodex of individuals who are running my investment. So oil wells, that's a really big one in our portfolio because of how we feel about the potential of oil playing out over the next few years. I think that the companies that are producing the crude oil are also being very careful in scaling up operations again, because they don't want to get burned a second time. They had to pay people to take oil off their hands at a certain point, and so now they want to carefully ease back into that. So guess what that means for us? That means oil is going to remain bullish for the next, I don't know, 6 months, 12 months, maybe a couple of years, right? And so while that's happening, I want to make sure that I'm invested and I'm positioned correctly to benefit from everything that's happening in that industry. Guys, I hope this was super informative. Hopefully this makes sense to you. Make sure that you do a little bit of research, look into crude oil, find ways that you can plug in. This is not investment advice. However, me personally, I'm positioned bullish on crude oil. And if you get an opportunity to do your own research and potentially maybe even invest in crude oil, you may like it. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you all in the next video.